Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I want to thank Gabriel, who had sent me a question through email asking about how it is that if a dollar is borrowed into existence, in order to pay that dollar back, you would have to have yet another dollar to pay the interest, but yet that other dollar doesn't exist. So there's no way of paying back all the debt plus the interest because there's simply not enough dollars out there to pay back the debt plus the interest part of things, where there's more debt than dollars. And he asked me how it is that this is possible. Like, can I explain this? And no, it doesn't make any sense, because that's exactly the case. There is more debt out there than there is dollar to cover that debt. And so there's no way that we can pay back all the debt. If all debts were paid off, all student loan debts, mortgages, government debt, all debts, like there was no more debt out there, the dollar would cease to exist, and yet we would still owe. That's the predicament that we are now in. Now, how did this even come about? Like, how is this even possible that this could exist? There was a time when we had a gold standard where all debts were due in gold, essentially, or silver, or, a note that equated to, gold or silver, saying that it was like a claim ticket that you could get gold or silver. Basically, our silver certificates, silver and gold certificates. Now, these were the instruments that we used in order to pay our debts, were gold and silver. But that's back when we had a gold standard. We have moved from a gold standard into what they call a fiat standard, or a fiat currency. It's not really a standard. It's now the new monetary system. And this is something that the world had never experienced before, to be on a 100% fiat currency. Now, to order to understand what happened, you have to kind of go back to 1913, back when the Federal Reserve was established. And they weren't the first central bank. I mean, other central banks existed out there who wanted to be the issuer of currency. Now, this is what we have to really understand, is that during the establishment of the Federal Reserve, the problem that had existed at the time was that we did not have an elastic money supply. Now, this is important to understand because what we had to go through were business cycles. You would find a concentration of the money before it would fall back into many hands, be redistributed, and then concentrate again. And this was the business cycle. So as business was taking place and people are earning money and they're doing their things, they're accumulating money. But there's only so much money out there. So if you have people who are hoarding onto the money, so to speak, making a savings, what you are doing is you're depriving the availability of currency out there to do commerce. You see what's happened here? So as you're doing a lot of business and concentrating the money, what that does is deprive that money out there for other people to do purchasing with. And that's really where the Federal Reserve says, hey, we can do something about this business cycle problem. That as the business cycle starts to heat up and the concentration of money starts to occur, and you start to deprive the economy of funds, or not funds, but just money, currency, well, then the Federal Reserve can be what they refer to as an elastic money supply. So as the economy heats up, they'll inject money into the system as it's needed, right, to make sure that everybody has enough currency to continue on doing their business. And then as the economy slows down, they'll pull that money back out. That was the idea of the Federal Reserve. That's what they had sold to the government. This is or to the people, essentially, out there. I mean, I think the government knew exactly what would happen. But this was kind of the idea behind it, is that because we had this limited amount of currency out there due to the gold standard, the Federal Reserve would introduce an elastic money supply. And they promised, we won't print too much. Right? Now, how does this money even come into existence in the first place? See, now the Federal Reserve, they can't just print up money and just willy-nilly hand it over. Like, a lot of people think that they can just print up money and just inject it into the system. That's not the way it works. It can't work like that. It's against the Federal Reserve's charter. The Fed has to purchase something, right? And what they have to purchase is like treasuries, gold, SDRs, those are called special drawing rights. That's a basket of world currencies that have been put together into a single currency, SDRs. I'm not going to go too deep into that. That's its own video. But there's certain things, mortgage-backed securities, right? They can put all this stuff on their balance sheet. Now, when we think about treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, because those are the big ones, this was the quantitative easing program. And I think that's probably the easiest way for people to understand how it is that the Federal Reserve operates. Because if we think about quantitative easing and the way that they went and just purchased a bunch of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, now when they went and just purchased that, again, they didn't go directly to the treasury and say, hey, we're going to be buying your treasuries with our printed up money. What they had to do was they went to the primary dealers. So the Federal Reserve doesn't go to the treasury, they go to the big banks. And the Fed is purchasing treasuries that have already been purchased. That's something to understand, is that if they had gone directly to the treasury, that would be illegal, because that would be considered monetizing the debt. Right? Where they just basically take the U.S. treasuries and then turn it into money. That's technically illegal, even though they are routing through the big banks, the primary dealers, and they're purchasing something that has already been purchased. That little move technically is not monetizing the debt, because they are purchasing something that had already been purchased, even though the big banks know that then if the Fed purchases it from them, they can go right to the treasury and buy it again. So it's just kind of playing a middleman in between it all. So this is something to think about, because as the Federal Reserve starts to unwind their balance sheet, what's really happening there? The Federal Reserve is allowing treasuries and mortgage-backed securities to roll off their balance sheet. So when they had printed up money, which they didn't really do, they just kind of created digital entries into a computer, but we're just going to call it printing money. When they printed up money and bought those treasuries and put them on their balance sheet, those treasuries are a loan to the government, meaning that they will come due plus an interest, which means that the fiat currency, those Federal Reserve notes that they had printed up and purchased the treasury with, will then be coming back to the Federal Reserve plus the interest that the treasury pays. And unless the Federal Reserve rolls that over into new debt, then that money disappears. Right? That's Federal Reserve then burning that money up, essentially, because once it comes back to the Fed, unless they put it back out there, it's now back to the Fed and eliminated. So now this is really how the currency is now operating, is that the Federal Reserve has all this quantitative easing out there with this huge balance sheet, and now they're allowing that balance sheet to roll off. If they were to allow that balance sheet to completely roll off, everything that they had on there, all the treasuries, all the mortgage-backed securities, all that other stuff out there, they would have back all the fiat currency that they printed out there, and there would be interest to pay. And there's no money, there's no fiat currency to pay the interest. So this is really where the problem really exists, as far as the debt can never be eliminated. Right? Now, granted, we can come up with U.S. Treasury notes that are issued directly out of the Treasury. And now this is something very similar to like the Federal Reserve and how they issue out Federal Reserve notes for the purpose of purchasing treasuries. The Treasury itself could issue out notes saying, hey, we are backing this with the ability to tax our people and take it back. Again, this is like another way of introducing a fiat currency into the system. It isn't exactly perfect, but at least it's not at the whims of a private banking system. Do I think it's good? I don't. I don't think anything as far as a promise to pay and using that promise to pay as our currency is a good system. I don't agree with that. I think that gold standard is a good system. The only problem with it is that unless you are a manufacturing state, like a country that manufactures, what you are going to do is export all your gold as you try to bring in the foreign products that you need for your daily lives. So here in the United States, if we were to switch to a gold standard, we would export all our gold, and then once the gold was gone, there would be nobody sending us anything, and since we are not a manufacturing state here ourselves, we would immediately fall into poverty, right? That's a major problem. So this is really where like a lot of people need to wrap their heads around the idea of having a gold standard or returning to a gold standard or even going to like Bitcoin. Anything that is limited like that, unless you are a manufacturer, a producer, a saver, then what you are going to do is you are going to end up purchasing foreign products, exporting all your money, and falling into poverty after you run out of money. And that's really where the the major predicament is for us here in the United States, is that if the Federal Reserve was to fail at their attempts to continue on with monetary policies and holding on to the world reserve currency, or being the issuer of world reserve currency, the moment that that fails, there is no backup plan for us in order to bring in the new money. We bring in new money by debt issuance. We used to have the gold standard. When we manufactured, the world sent us their gold. Once we realized that we would export all our gold to the fact that we no longer were a manufacturing state, Nixon says, nah, I don't think so. And they cut us off from the gold standard and saying, we're going to go straight to fiat currency from this point on. And no worries, the dollar is always going to be as good as gold. Anyway, thank you very much, Gabriel, for suggesting that video. I hope that helps. Again, there is no bringing the debt back to a position in which that you can pay it all off, because there is not enough dollars in the system in order to cover the amount of debts that have been issued. Very strange predicament, right? That's why we should all hold gold and silver for our personal savings. And I personally am into cryptocurrencies, cash, gold and silver. Those are my places that I save, right? And if you kind of understand how it is that the Federal Reserve has put us in a position in which that there is no way that we can return back to what it once was, you would probably be loading up on the gold and silver as well for your savings. When it comes to monetary policy and it comes to the world reserve currency, the Federal Reserve is our way of life. The moment that they end, we fall into poverty. Understand that. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.